I'm Ryan Androsov. Welcome to Let's Think Digital. If I've learned one thing in my time working in and with governments, it's that trust is everything. If you look at what's happening around the world, it's clear that we're in a moment in time where people don't trust their governments. There's skepticism about the impact of big technology companies, concerns about new technologies like artificial intelligence, and fear about the future, including the future of our democratic institutions themselves. In my experience, I've seen time and time again how complex, opaque, and often infuriating bureaucratic systems can challenge citizens' faith in government and erode trust in those who are there to serve the public. Whether it's navigating complex tax filing rules, trying to access healthcare supports, or something as simple as getting a passport renewed, delays and failed service delivery experiences continue to erode trust in government, and frankly, raise doubt in the mind of citizens as to government's ability to accomplish even basic tasks. We've even seen in countries around the world where these service failures become political scandals and can bring down governments. So how can we rebuild trust? To answer this question, we're going to go back to the Estonian story in part 2 of our deep dive into the Estonian digital transformation journey. And we're talking to Andres Raieste, a senior vice president at the Estonian-based digital transformation firm Nortal, which has played a big role over the years in developing Estonia's world-leading digital government services and infrastructure. We talked about why trust is important, how digital services can create trust in society through small incremental improvements rather than focusing on flashy innovation. Andres shared the perhaps surprising fact that the Estonian tax collector is actually one of the most trusted institutions in the country, and why that was such an important sign of success in their digital government efforts. We even got into a discussion on the role of emerging technologies like blockchain and AI, and if they should be used in government. It was a really insightful conversation and made me think about how the topics we discuss on this podcast are so important, not just for creating better services for people, but the impact that they can have in the broader context of the geopolitical tensions we're seeing in countries around the world. But before I turn it over to Andres, if you're watching today's episode on YouTube, I'd love it if you could take a moment to hit the subscribe button. We're trying to reach as many people as we can to build this movement of people who are interested in how we can modernize government. And the more subscribers on our channel, the more likely that our conversations get in front of people who need to see them. Everyone here at Let's Think Digital would be so grateful for the help in spreading the word. And now, our conversation with Andres. So we're back live at Forward 50, or at least live for us now here on the conference floor, continuing our series of interesting conversations about the world of digital government. And really happy to have Andres with us, who's joining us from the company Nortal, based in Estonia, but doing work around the world. And I know you're here to talk a little bit about trust in government, which we'll get to in a little bit. But thank you and welcome to Ottawa.
Thank you.
Now, you've got an interesting, I think, history on this. I mean, you have been working in the private sector for the last number of years, in and around digital government, but I know you started your career inside the Estonian government. Wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your personal career path and kind of what led you to getting involved in this space that we call digital government.
Well, I started as an engineer, so I was doing quite a bit of coding. That was a very long time ago, 20 years ago, or maybe even something around that. And then somehow the journey led me to Estonian government. So I started my career, I believe, in Ministry of Justice, in their digitalization department that later on became an entire organization. And this was like, back then was like this, one of the earliest organizations that was driving large-scale government digital transformation programs. Mm-hmm. And it was really building up the digital government from the institutional and legislative point of view. Mm-hmm. So working with those programs, back then we didn't realize that shapes the entire future of the Estonian government overall, or the journey. So that, it built up some foundational registries, the entire legislative system all around it, that manifestation of the once only principle, how it really works, and that entire system. So back then, all of us, like really from the technical point of view and everybody else, these were these core practices that were being developed back then without even realizing it. Only looking back in hindsight can we tell, okay, what we did back then, that this actually meant the following.
Right.
So it was very exciting times, honestly.
Yeah.
So a lot what happened back then was also purely experimental.
Okay.
And so if anybody asked us back then, that they would say, did you have a extremely good idea back then, what are being rolled out? No, absolutely not. So a lot of things we can look back and say that we had also incredible luck, that somehow a lot of smart people were able to come together and make certain decisions which turned out really good decisions.
Yep.
So I was in the government for many years, and then wanted to do similar things in the rest of the world. This is what led me to Nortal later on, and understood that there's a lot, technology is changing how we live in our societies, and there's a lot of good practices all around the world. Like there's incredible innovation that has been done in New Zealand, in Chile, in Singapore, in Finland, in Denmark, in Estonia, and elsewhere, and we need to create a platform where we can bring all of this competence and understanding together, and then like accelerate it somehow. And this is why I joined Nortal, and like overall what we're trying to or desiring to achieve.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting, and I think having that global reach, as you said, to be able to bring some of those practices together is really important. And it's difficult, I think, for people who are in government on the day-to-day, trying to manage their jobs, trying to deal with kind of putting out fires that are popping up, to be able to take the time to understand what some of those best practices or examples are that are coming out in other parts of the world. And events like this at Forward 50 are useful for that, but having organizations that are trying to be able to bring that perspective together certainly is kind of a useful gap that I think is missing in some places, certainly within that digital government ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so you're here speaking about trust. Your talk you're giving at Forward 50 is about trust in government, the importance of that. And I think it's an interesting topic, right? Because we're at a point where globally we've got declining levels of trust. I mean, almost across the world, with probably a few exceptions around that. At the same time, we also have a lack of trust in technology, right? I think we're seeing a lot of debates around big technology companies and the role that they play as well. And so, maybe to start with, curious if you could kind of give us a bit of a sense of how you think trust impacts digital government and what the relationship between the two of them are.
I would maybe put it first from that angle that trust is one of those outcomes that overall were even, let's say, if we talk about digitalization, trust is one of those outcomes that we desire to create overall. Like this answers the question, why are we doing this? I mean, democracies, they rely on trust. Mm-hmm. And there's interesting that research clearly shows that trust and effectiveness are very tightly correlated. So practically speaking, let's say, instruments that increase trust, they also tend to increase effectiveness, and the other way around. So there is a very clear business case for both of them.
Right.
That why to do this.
Right.
So other than that, I mean, as I said, in democracies, what are the other options? So a lot of the governments struggle with keeping the society cohesive. So solution to that is to create trust for the institutions, create trust between the different social groups, and practically speaking, there's not too many ways how to do it.
Right.
Not too many ways how to do it. So.
Well, and so it also strikes me that there's a little bit of what we sometimes call the chicken and egg paradox around trust, right? Because you have to have a level of trust to be able to invest in transformation of the state, But I think, as you're rightly pointing out, unless you've got that trust, it's tough to actually make real progress on that. And I guess my question is, where do you start, right? Like, how do you kind of break that, what can be a vicious circle and turn it into a virtuous circle?
Yeah, small things.
Yeah.
So the funniest thing is that trust is incredibly researched area. I really like that how our co-researcher on trust, how he's putting this, is that there is very little fields of trust that hasn't been researched. It's very tricky to find it. And one thing that constantly comes out is that what creates trust is the small continuous improvements in the public services. Small ones, not big ones, small ones. Because that really drives back to the cognitive bias that we know as the negativity bias. That we remember negative things so much more strongly than the positive events. So practically all the institutions that are capable of doing small things enjoy significantly higher public approval.
Right.
So there's a bunch of these type of small tips that are, practically speaking, regularly within all the authority of the public services to actually implement those instruments in their organizations and in their policies. And the funny part is that as well, that trust. What is our experience is that it's really common sense if you really think about it. Like, we can say that it's a bunch of research, but it's common sense.
Yeah. No, and I think that logically makes a lot of sense, that those small incremental improvements that people can feel in their daily lives, does have that ability to kind of shift how they're thinking about some of these issues. So I wonder, like, thinking back to those early days of when you were in government and kind of, what I might call the early days of Estonia's digital journey, was trust ever kind of viewed as an explicit goal of the digitization efforts, or was it just a natural outcome?
Back then, honestly, I don't think that there was too much thinking around it, but there were several things that worked out really well in terms of, I think that one thing that I think that the Estonian government was able to nail rather early was the way how to talk about digitalization in the society.
Right.
Communication. And citizens don't really care about the how part. They don't care about what power specifically, which technological marvel is now powering the public services. They care about that it looks great, that it solves their problems, is easy to utilize, doesn't cost them money, doesn't waste their time, these sort of things. And there are even different surveys that are showcasing that what drives the trust the most. Like OECD trust survey is very, very known one, and satisfaction with the service experience is by far the largest outlier. What creates trust? What is the smallest one? Innovative ideas.
Interesting.
Yes, it's super interesting.
Yeah.
And if you have somebody preaching around that utilize this next technological marvel to an average voter, that in reality doesn't increase trust. What matters is that person gets their problem solved.
Yes.
So they don't care how.
Yeah.
But So focusing on that, so there's like several showcases back from the earlier Estonian days that how are we capable of creating trust for the society, for significantly larger programs, that how to communicate. So don't say that this 100 million euro program is now, I don't know, collecting your data records and creating some sort of large scale program for a private sector. No, let's talk about that. Okay, that is going to create free patient movement. For the patients, will drive down the cost of healthcare. Is going to save lives.
Yes,
these are the outcomes. So the question is always, okay, we need to be capable of understanding the impact of what we're doing. There needs to be a business case for the society,
right?
And it's always there. So the question is that are we able to find it? Are we capable? And and that also creates the goals for the program itself. How do we prioritize what is valuable? We need to understand the socioeconomic impact. Only then we're capable of, let's say, communicate it in the right way to the, there is wisdom in the crowds.
Yes.
If they don't understand it, then it's a very valuable question that are we doing the right thing?
Well, and then also, as you were saying, the communication around this, right? Like how we talk about this and the language we use. So as part of this conference, you've got a new white paper about trust in government that's going to be released soon. And I had a chance to take a look at some of the examples in there, and you had a really interesting one around tax collection. Right, and I think that's always, it's been a digital service that's pointed to in Estonia, and this kind of notion of how it got shifted from saying, tax collection is about trying to find the bad guys, and flipped it to say, actually, it's about how do we empower citizens, right? And I thought that's a very interesting way to kind of frame it and think about it. I mean, just kind of curious for you to talk about that a little bit more, and if there's other examples like that where kind of the framing of services has moved from being punitive to being empowering.
Yeah, I love that example because it's so paradoxical in a way that one of the most trusted government authority in Estonia, if I remember, is Rescue Board by heart. But that's kind of logical because they save your life.
Right. Yep.
But with the tax organization, they take your money. So how is it possible that in Estonia people trust the tax authority more than anything? It's like third, fourth, if I remember correctly, in the overall ranking. And and this is the question that what are the outcomes, what that organization is trying to achieve.
Yep.
So it creates a equitable business environment where everybody are having equal rights. So if they're capable of communicating and actually succeeding in those outcomes, then practically speaking, everybody starts to understand that, the taxation is a necessary evil of sort.
Yep.
But if that organization is assuring that all of that happens equitably for everyone, that in reality creates trust.
Right.
Now comes the other aspects of it, that how can we empower further? So let's say that the one of the indicators for the tax authorities always is the tax cap.
Yep.
The tax cap is so the strategies for tax organizations typically are the like a calculation between intrusion and collection.
Yep.
So you audit more, you lose on trust.
Yep.
So that's the calculation mostly. And now is the question that at a certain point, the tax cap is low enough that you would need to invest further into audit or intrusion.
Right.
But that starts to affect the formula.
Yep.
So there are way better ways how to actually start increasing the compliance, utilizing methods like targeted transparency, basically all the different methodologies to focus on voluntary compliance, that you would want to pay your taxes. And that also goes completely back to those very basic schemes that let's make it simple, let's make it understandable, let's make you understand your impact as a citizen. So clever service design concepts that modify your behavior as a citizen.
Yes.
So these are those things that we care more about our country. We showcase the impact. Can even, why not add gamification to it?
Yep.
These sort of concepts, and these are moving the needle actually. You can see clearly that these are moving the voluntary compliance, which is voluntary compliance is possible only in a high trust environment.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I think anybody who's listened to this podcast before may have heard me talk about, one of the classic examples from Estonia on taxes is just the fact that you have automatic filing, right? You talk about the service improvement. This is something we've struggled with actually making happen here in Canada, but this idea that, for most people who have simple taxes, you essentially, my understanding is you get essentially a text message at the end of the year and it says, hey, here's what we think it is. And if you agree, you just press yes and you're done.
Yeah. So, it's a really good example of how simplicity, like what is the desired outcome in order to drive trust. But also that also brings to a very important point that how do you go towards it from the low trust environment towards creating more trust? So there are different strategies like nudging, for example, that let's make two services. One service is a service where you need to enter the data yourself. It consumes your time. And then there is a button there that trust me and I will pre-fill it for you.
Right.
And with that you need to consent, or there is a mechanism around it that if you trust the system and the system is transparent enough, then practically speaking, everybody wants to utilize the service that actually saves their time. The best example of this is, in my opinion, like Facebook. That people give a lot of their personal data to Facebook or social media or so forth. Why do they do it? Why do they not want to give it to the public service? Why do I give it to completely somebody else? It's because it provides value for them. Emotional value, and that drives over everything else. This user satisfaction.
And I think a degree of, maybe put a different way, people are willing to some degree to trade privacy for convenience.
Exactly.
Sometimes. Although with government, it tends to be held to a higher bar, right? And that trust gap can be a little bit higher. I'm also wondering on the internal side, so I don't know if you'd be able to speak to this, but when Estonia was making some of these changes, like for example, putting in automatic tax filing, sometimes we also get resistance inside government because people and structures and systems are used to doing things a different way. And I'm wondering, did you have to convince the bureaucracy within Estonia to change, or was this a very natural kind of process where there was a lot of consensus that we had to actually make these reforms?
It's step by step. So practically also the change in Estonia or other countries, I believe so as well, that at least that I know of. These changes are small, gradual, and I believe that it's impossible to roll out a digital government off the box. It's not possible because that's societal change what we're talking here about. It's not technological change, societal change. And these are very small improvements that are happening all across the entire government. And if the ball gets rolling, simply I believe that there are some organizations that are more important than others. Why I like the example of tax authorities, because you make tax authority trustworthy, or let's say trusted by the people on a very high level. I don't think that then there is anything else that you cannot do.
Right.
Because the bar there is the highest, in my opinion.
Yeah, because there is that tension, or maybe it's a perceived tension between, on the one hand, governments need to get access to people's data to be able to give them good integrated services. Citizens tend to worry about privacy and making sure government only collects the bare minimum. And so, it really does sound like it's kind of having this baseline level of trust is just this necessary ingredient to be able to build any kind of integrated service.
I'm not sure that.
Please,
a lot of people think somehow that in Estonia we have some sort of concept such as a baseline Estonian trust. Absolutely not. We're just as paranoid as everybody else. People are people. I assure you, I'm just as paranoid as you are. And everybody else. And we have simply focused on different strategies that how to resolve our basic instinct not to trust. So I would say that underlying pillar concept of our digital government is the concept that as a citizen I own my data. It manifests everywhere. And what it means is that, by the way, in Europe we have something called GDPR, so General Data Protection Regulation. And on Europe it's pretty tough. And it was funny that when this regulation came, then there were countries that said that, basically hands up that, okay, now digitalization is over, we cannot do anything. And then there were different countries who said, wow, that's great, now we can do everything.
Right.
So it's completely different way. How do we look at it? We look at this that yes, data belongs to the citizen. We need to regulate how do we utilize that data. We need to become transparent and show it. And by the way, there is no transparency if you're also not capable of proving. So you can't simply say trust us. You need to be capable of proving. How to do it? Transparency. So in Estonia we have a system where basically it's if somebody misutilizes my data, I can kind of be, let's say, assured in a way that first of all I will find out. If I don't, somebody else will find out. So there is a wider way how to protect the citizen rights. In that sense, so that.
And as we heard about here at the conference, as some listeners may not be aware, in Estonia as a citizen, like you essentially can sign into a dashboard and be able to see the information and data that government has about you and be able to see who's looked at that data, be able to kind of look back on the other side of the looking glass, so to speak.
Yeah.
Whereas in Canada, it's a very manual process, takes a long time, and a lot of it still is tied up in paper files that are not very transparent ultimately.
Yeah. So the important aspect there is as well that yes, we have a central system where basically as a citizen you can see who has been utilizing your data, why and how. So this is built into the digital public infrastructure on top of it, and it's a cohesive system. But actually that can also be done in any single service. Any single service. Let's say that you don't have that system right now. That doesn't mean that you should now spend the next who knows how many years figuring out that central system. No, absolutely not. You can start small, and actually any service can be made transparent. There's any sort of authority that is doing something with your data and then offering service back.
Yes.
Inside of that service, you can already tell how we're utilizing, making the algorithms transparent, and so forth. So, so everything can be scaled down, everything can be scaled up. That's the beauty of it. It's policy, that's principle.
Well, and so then talking about central services, I wanted to talk about X-Road for a minute because, X-Road is kind of the backbone of Estonia's digital systems. It's kind of data infrastructure. We've talked about X-Road or mentioned it a little bit on the podcast before, but I'd be curious to get your kind of explanation of like, what is it actually, and how does the X-Road model differ from how, say, a government in Canada might traditionally set up its services or share them?
Best explanation for what X-Road is that take off the X, it's a road.
It's a road.
Yeah. So it just connects. I mean, the entire point of this is that, historically, we're used to looking at the government as a bunch of different authorities. And as a citizen, you're thinking, okay, that's the tax authority. That's the, I don't know, some sort of social benefits organization or unemployment organization or like different organizations. But actually, it's just the government.
Right.
It shouldn't be you as a citizen, it shouldn't be your problem how the government works.
Right.
So what we need to do for that, we need to tie the government into a cohesive whole.
Yeah.
How do you do it? You require something that is capable of creating data exchange or like information highways between the different government systems, the registries, and so forth. There's not many different ways how to do it. So you need to create some sort of a highway between them and also assure that it's super secure.
Yep.
But further is that if you really, let's say, think about it, this is also, like, I love this term, this digital public infrastructure, because roads are also public infrastructure. Yep. And what it means public is that I'm not sure that you would like it to be private.
Yep.
So I wouldn't be sure that, for example, if your digital public infrastructure is somebody constantly takes a transaction price off it. I'm not sure. Difficult policy questions that when somebody starts to implement their digital public infrastructure, part of it also a data exchange system like X-Road or something else, that we make the right decisions and understand that what it truly is.
Yep.
Because it's a very different question whether your roads, to whom do they belong? Do they belong to the citizen or do they belong to somebody else? It's very, very crucial decision point to make.
And we have privatized toll roads in some places here in Canada, certainly in Ontario, and they are controversial for exactly that reason. And so, just going back to X-Road for a second, so it is, like, on a technical level, it's essentially a data protocol, right? That allows different government, the private sector, others to be able to interoperably share data with each other.
Yes, it's a data exchange system that securely allows to exchange data.
And did it become, when it was being released, was it mandatory? Like, was there a requirement for the government to say you have to use this, or was adoption of it voluntary?
I think in the beginning it was voluntary. So at a certain point in time when it was being rolled out, of course, it was like done gradually. There were lots of point-to-point integrations between different authorities. So if you roll out something like this, you cannot just force everybody from tomorrow, everybody do it. you need to start gradually doing it.
Yep.
Also, we did it the same way, the gradual adoption and like constantly updating the regulation, like bit by bit by bit.
Yeah.
And then like later on, that became like the very quickly back then, but in some years it became the de facto way for the government to operate, and that started to develop further. And later on, what you got was like a manifestation of the once only principle.
Yeah.
I mean that the erode really is one thing is the technical system, but I would say what is even more important is that what is the fundamental policy or regulative system underneath that drives all of this, or what enables all of this. So this is like regulated in Estonia in a way that you have different registries which basically regulate that who owns, like what authority is allowed to own what, to collect what data and store it, and what are the privileges and like considerations related to specific data. So. This is what basically establishes like what can be done with your data, who can use it, and cohesively that creates this once only principle that we have, for example, an address registry. That means that no single authority is allowed to ask from me where I live. They need to get it from that system.
Yes.
Like, don't ask me that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And from a citizen perspective, if I can extend the metaphor of the car for a second, or the road, their car to get on that is their digital identity, right? And if I understand right, with Estonian citizens, you have a physical digital ID card with a chip, as well as an electronic, essentially digital ID that kind of pairs those two up to prove that you are who you are.
Yes, I think almost everybody uses it for a mobile phone now.
Yes.
So it's a PKI-based system. It originates actually from the banks. So the history of Estonian digital identity system is that from a very pragmatic origins. There was several banks and different organizations were thinking, look, we're all trying to solve the same problem.
Yep.
That all of us somehow, let's say, want to provide online services, banking services to its citizen, and it needs to be super trustworthy. So there's like PIN calculators, there was like very long password cards, and none of those were good enough. So required some sort of system that is like, first of all, it's like has a better user experience than some sort of PIN calculator. But the second part was that independently doing that system for every different financial organization or some other service organization, quite expensive. So for them, that was very reasonable start collaborating that, look, let's create a single system where we all benefit, we solve the same problem, and let's utilize the best possible secure system possible. And on that regard, practically speaking, there are not many different ways how to do it. So you need cryptography, you need and there's not very different ways how to utilize it. So we utilize a PKI solution. So I wouldn't know what would be a better alternative.
Right.
So and later on, simply the different carriers became different. So more, let's say, it started as this plastic card. Then it went into a SIM card in your phone. Now it's an application. So like this way how to provide it to the citizen that has changed.
Has evolved with technology.
But originally, let's say, it happened because there was a need for it.
Yes.
It's just, there was a business case for it. And then government adopted it as well. And that basically created a system that's trusted through the entire society.
Very interesting. I didn't realize that it started with the banks and then went to governments. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, there was originally, it was actually the banks and telecommunication companies, I think so as well, that so long time ago, that were like putting into food stores those ID card readers in like huge boxes. Just take it. Just take it. And then this later on, this ID card, this is now for many stores, this is a retailer loyalty card.
Right.
So, I don't know, I like cheese and I buy cheese and the loyalty card is that I put in my ID card. And stupid example, but my point is that it's a regular stores.
Yes.
Is that as a loyalty card?
Exactly.
So that's more uses.
Yeah, and I think that is different certainly than how it is here, where we do have government credentials, certainly the private sector doesn't tend to leverage them in the same way. So for a lot of people, you're not usually dealing with government every day, but you're probably dealing with your local, supermarket or your local pharmacy, or the economy on a regular basis. And because they're divided, I mean, it sounds like in the Estonian society, that becomes just critical to your daily life and becomes much more accepted as part of how you live as a result of that.
Yeah. So exactly. So kind of everything that has this whole of society component of it tends to work better.
Yes.
That's our experience.
Yeah.
That just government doing something, then it's a question of sustainability a little bit, and is it like what is driving the competition and so forth. Just private sector doing something, then something else gets left behind.
Yep.
Somehow something that works, solutions that work out both for the public and the private sector tend to be most reliable somehow.
Yeah, and more sustainable. As
exactly.
You're saying. Okay, so you were saying there's not a lot of ways to do things in terms of these kind of technical solutions to some of these core kind of public digital infrastructure pieces. I did want to bring up, though, we were talking about this earlier off camera, is blockchain, which becomes the kind of one of these what I might call shiny object technologies that gets put out there and maybe has some use cases in some instances. But my understanding is blockchain is essentially not used as part of erode, and it's not used very widely in Estonia.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, let me explain this. So, with blockchain, we need to understand very clearly what we're talking about, and this tends to become sometimes difficult. And also what blockchain kind of represents. I mean, blockchain represents a situation where we don't trust each other, and then we require a system how we can collaborate where we don't trust each other. Now, kind of what is the problem with that is that actually we want to create a situation where we trust each other. Mm-hmm. So we want to end up with an outcome where we don't need blockchain.
Right.
So focusing on something like that is like an antithesis of what we're trying to achieve, really. So so that creates a problem. So
it's almost like blockchain exists because you've got a societal failure of some sort.
Exactly.
And it's better to fix the society than paper it over with technology.
Let's fix the society.
Yeah.
So and but there are cases where it is very useful. Mm-hmm. So for example, and even before like blockchain became a thing. So I know you probably know in 2007 there was this event in Estonia that became known as a world first, like a massive national scale cyber attack on Estonia by Russia. Mm-hmm. And it was a very big thing back then that this large cyber attack that was like declaration of war in cyberspace. Yeah. And but many people don't realize that it never stopped. It's still active. There is no peace anymore in cyberspace. It's only constant warfare, at least for some countries. And back then, the Estonian government, they realized that this is now the normality. And we need to be building our digital government to be capable of with like handling constant cyber warfare.
Yes.
And we also need to be, let's say, understanding how to actually, if that's the premise that you're constantly in a war, how do we build up a system that is capable of providing normal services where you don't have any, regular sort of downtimes and like breaking and tampering of information. So different mechanisms, but one of those mechanisms was that if let's say, and also a realization that if your opponent is highly motivated, highly financed, there will be eventuality where they will find a way through at one point. Mm-hmm. And in those situations, what that might leak, sensitive information might leak. Sensitive information might be deleted.
Right.
And sensitive information might be tampered with. Those latter two might even be more dangerous than the first one.
Right.
And
in part because it could happen silently for a while and you might not know that your data has been tampered with.
Yeah. Exactly. And there are actually ways how to protect yourselves against data tampering. So we understood that we need to protect our registries both from the internal and external attacks.
Yep.
We need to assure that, for example, our like most sensitive government registries, we can assure that nobody has ever, both internally and externally, has never tampered some data in there. So how do you do that? So there's actually very simple ways how to do that. That technically speaking, you have some database records, and you through crypto, you link those database records together, where every next record in the registry depends on the previous one.
Right.
And if the first registry, very first hash is a public information, for example, published even in a newspaper or somewhere, doesn't really matter. But then everything what comes after it can be verified back to the original source. So much later, this became known as blockchain.
Yes.
Much later, but the same really simple principle. This was actually something that was driving the Estonian government security already much earlier. And simply blockchain added a distributed ledger to it, where let's say you don't need to publish something in New York Times or somewhere.
Yes.
So it's a very pragmatic use case for that, where there is an extremely specific use case for it.
Yes.
But what I very strongly believe is that technology shouldn't find an owner. Owner should find technology shouldn't find a problem to solve.
Exactly.
So
yeah, as they sometimes say, some of these new technologies are solutions in search of a problem, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So and obviously we're seeing also a lot of that with AI currently.
Yes.
Which, in my opinion, also, I mean, it's clear. This is transformative what is happening with humankind at this point.
Yep.
I mean, we're becoming like transhuman in that sense. It's transformative, but there's also a lot of looking for us.
Yep. And a lot of hype, right?
Yeah,
these new technologies have a lot of hype.
Crazy amount of hype. But still, we need to understand that what works where.
Yeah.
Not the other way around. Same principles apply.
Yeah. And again, I imagine in Estonia case, because you have this very real external threat, this focus on how do you make sure that you're resilient, how do you make sure that you can withstand that threat, probably helps to focus efforts a little bit, I would imagine, on finding very practical, tangible use cases for technology, rather than just, as we were talking about earlier, innovation for the sake of innovation.
I would say that it's a paradox, but I would say what drives innovation is not being very rich.
Yep.
If you need to do things cheaply, you do things pragmatically, and turns out pragmatic solutions are innovative.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, being very honest, I think in Canada, we're likely going to be going through a period of budget cutbacks over the next few years. There's a lot of debate around, should we be kind of shrinking the size of government? And I do, to your point, sometimes think those constraints might be the engine for a new wave of innovation.
Exactly. Yeah.
But, so speaking of a new wave, and kind of the last thing I wanted to really ask you about, we talk a lot about digital government. I have this slide that I often use, which I kind of look at the history of technology and government, and I kind of view there being like three phases. There was like the early e-government, when governments were putting information online for the first time. Then you had government 2.0, as they were calling it, which was really about social media. And how do we communicate differently, things like open data and open information initiatives. Then in the last decade, we've talked a lot about digital government, right? Which is this kind of idea of how do you modernize the state by taking advantage of some of these new technologies. But your company has put out a couple of papers and kind of coined this new term of personal government as kind of a next iteration of where digital government's evolving to. And I'm wondering if you could unpack that a bit. I think this idea of personal government is a really interesting one.
I would start maybe untangling it from the service experience or the outcomes point of view. That also when we created in Estonia the very first digital services, honestly, the service experience was pretty horrible. So I mean, it's typically look like this, that you have some sort of an e-service where you could upload a document,
Right.
and then you had to go to a government office or call a help desk or something like that, or maybe not. Maybe they sent you back to some human clerk on the other side, and did their magic, and then you got some PDF document. And the problem is that, I mean, practically speaking, these services do not really save too much time. It makes information processing easier and so forth, but the real cost saving, both for the citizen, for the economy, and for the government as well, slightly, but not really too much.
Right.
And then some time later, it was understood that, look, the only way how to actually start creating more valuable outcomes is that we need to start understanding what is that data that we're communicating over. So let's get rid of documents. Let's change documents into data. Something that we are capable of completely rethinking the services from the point of view of the consumer, the taxpayer, the citizen, whomever. So instead of sending an application, can we, for example, completely turn the process upside down? That, for example, social benefit, that the story is probably told to death, but mother's benefit, that typical, like in most countries, there is some sort of childbirth benefit.
Yes.
And a typical example that mother would need to file an application, the child was born, then some processing on the back office probably needs to provide some additional documents, and then bam, finally check is posted in a box. Terrible, or better, money arrives on a bank account. But all of that is actually stupid, because the fact that child was born is registered in a hospital.
Right.
Most likely the mother's bank account number is also known by that point.
Yes.
Why not just send the money?
Yes.
Proactively.
Yeah.
So that requires quite a bit of mature digital public infrastructure underneath that is capable of creating that type of a data exchange between the different authorities, organizations involved, hospitals, so forth. Standardization, work on the legal system that you can actually connect this data together in a legal way and so forth. So, bam, you have the concept of proactive service.
Yes.
That is basically transforming worldwide the concept of how to provide more efficient social benefits to everyone. So that is the manifestation in my head of digital government. That away from the application era, data-driven organizations that are capable of offering significantly more effective public services to its citizen.
Yes.
So, and then, so what next? So this what next part we have been figuring out, all of us. I mean, all of us have been figuring out, and also lots of different organizations throughout the world. I've been figuring out that, what next? What are the next big challenges to solve? So we have explored, and we're still constantly researching and exploring what that next is. We have a couple of ideas. So in personal government, we try to research and package some of our findings into some sort of cohesive whole, which I would say probably in a year or two we should update. And this is also something that I believe that everybody should be very vocal about. Where is this going? But what I do believe, a couple of things. What are the biggest things, what are driving it, or the problems that we're trying to solve? First of all, complexity is constantly rising everywhere. One of the biggest problems that digital governments not really solve that well is that the complexity of the public authorities, this is becoming incomprehensible to people.
Right.
And it's insane that even that in constitutional rights in many countries, you have something that says that as a citizen, it's your right to know the legislation. But it nowhere says that I should have an army of lawyers who explain it to me. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So we need to be capable of making, like, if we ask from our citizen that they need to, let's say, be capable of existing in the society and being compliant with the law and so forth, then I would say it's fair to make the government also comprehensible then to the citizen. So I think that the problem that we need to solve is to reduce the complexity. And I think it's unrealistic to do like some sort of huge deregulation programs. It's just unrealistic. Might happen in some sort of fantasy world, but there are technological options how to actually make it more easier. So creating service interfaces that underneath are actually capable of hiding that complexity away, so that it exists there. The bureaucracy there might still be there, but the service experience for the citizen is so great. One of those examples, for example, is the service in Estonia called getting married. So typically you would have one service that you file an application for marriage. Then you might have a service that, for example, somebody changes the name, needs a new document. So all in all, long story short, you need to communicate with like 5 or 6 different government authorities, which is stupid. Why not just have a service called get married? All the steps are in there. That service itself communicates with all the different authorities. You still can have those institutions underneath and so forth, but you're capable of creating a super simple and realistic service interface for the citizen that solves their problem. Every country in the world can do that. So this is one of those concepts. So there's a lot of those more. For example, are we capable of can we actually create a better integration between the public sector and private sector? That, for example, I have a public sector service and the private sector can add on top of it their value add services, creating like a government as a platform. And so there's a lot of those different concepts that we have tried to package together, but the outcome should be that we're capable of reducing the complexity, making government feel as one singular entity that the citizen speaks to, and through it we're capable of creating better social cohesion and trust and added value.
Very interesting, and I think that notion of reducing complexity, even though, as you say, we're always going to have, I think, some degree of complexity on the back end, but how do you as a citizen have a much simpler, less complex experience? It's a big ambition, but it's an important one. And I tend to agree with you that doing the big, deregulation exercise almost never tends to work.
Exactly.
Because you don't know where to start. It's too big, right? It's too big to understand.
So a lot of people are saying that, we need to radically change the society. But let's be honest, actually what we need are small, incremental improvements. These are the things that we need because these are realistic to execute.
And they build up momentum over time.
Exactly,
right?
and trust.
And trust. Going back again to trust, I think it is a really important consideration. Our theme on the podcast this season is really about, how do we get ourselves moving? I think there's this sense that we feel a little bit stuck in the mud here in Canada. And I think what's really come out from this conversation is just this notion that trust is one of those really essential ingredients that I think, to be honest with you, we don't talk about enough. We don't kind of quantify it, but it is so essential to have that as a baseline if you're going to be able to move forward on that. So just to say, I really appreciate you taking the time talking with us. I think this has been a really helpful conversation on that, and so glad you could be here with us in person in Ottawa to share some of the great work that you've been doing.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me, and hopefully I'll be back.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really take to heart the reminder that even though challenges that we face in digital modernization can seem so huge and complex, it's actually the small incremental improvements in digital public infrastructure that will ultimately create trust in citizens and help empower efforts to improve public services. And in today's world, building trust and rebuilding trust is just so important. Thanks to Andres for speaking to me today and everyone from Estonia who took the time to talk with us about their journey over the past couple of episodes. If you haven't yet, be sure to check out our previous episode where we talk about the evolution of digital government in Estonia. And that's the show for this week. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast app, please be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review. We always love hearing from our listeners, so get in touch by emailing us at podcast@thinkdigital.ca, visiting our website, letsthinkdigital.ca, or using the hashtag letsthinkdigital on social media. You can find me on all the usual social media places, including now my personal account on Blue Sky and our Let's Think Digital podcast account on TikTok. We'd love to hear from you. Today's episode of Let's Think Digital was produced by myself, Wayne Chu, and Aislinn Bornay. Thanks so much for listening, and let's keep thinking digital.